Big story going on in Asia today. The president of the Philippines raising tensions with the United States once again.
I announce my separation from the United States.
Yeah, there he is, President Rodrigo Duterte of the Philippines, saying his country is separating from the United States and also calling on the Philippines to become more dependent, closer to China. Duterte making the announcement during a trip to China focusing on trade. The president of the Philippines says he wants to cut ties with the United States, both militarily and economically. Washington, meantime, is calling the comments baffling. And, of course, the president of the Philippines has said a lot of different things, baffling things, over the past couple of months since he came to power. For more on this, let's go to Waterloo. We've got Benoit Hardy-Chartrand joining us. He is a senior research associate at the Center for International Governance Innovation. Benoit, good to have you on today. Thank you for this.
Thank you for having me.
So what do you make of what we're hearing from Duterte now? What sort of significance does this have?
Well, it is quite a major turn of events. I mean, we have to keep in mind that the last few years, United States and the Philippines have grown quite close. I mean, they are treaty allies. They've had a treaty, a mutual defense treaty, since 1951. In 2014, the treaty was even enhanced, so now the United States had access to Philippines bases as well. And in terms of the South China Sea, there are several territorial disputes, and the United States have been quite aligned with the Philippines in the last few years. So now it's quite a reversal. The fact that the Philippines has announced its a separation with the United States and realigned with China changes quite a few things as far as geopolitics in the region. It will actually really hinder the legitimacy of United States foreign policy in the South China Sea and make it a lot harder for Washington to oppose Chinese actions in the region and the body of water.
A couple of years ago, the United States announced a so-called pivot to Asia. Benoit, as you know, they were going to be much more involved in the region, and one of the keys to that was the relationship with the Philippines. There's a bit of a great game going on in that part of the world between China and the United States, and different countries are falling in line with either China or the U.S. How bad is this for the Americans now, for Duterte to have said this?
Right. Well, I'm glad you mentioned the pivot, because when that was announced in 2014, and that was actually the brainchild of Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton. And when it was announced, I mean, it was based on several levels. But one of the main parts of the pivot was actually reinforcing its ties with some of its allies in Asia. So the Philippines was one of them, and the Philippines was very important. You need to have allies in Asia in order to reinforce American presence in the region. And now, as I mentioned earlier, the fact that the United States has been counting on the support of its allies in the region, been reinforcing ties, it is quite a blow to the United States. It's a lot harder to oppose, a lot harder to advance its foreign policy objectives in the region when one of the quite important countries in the region decides to turn its back on the United States. So we cannot underestimate the importance of this reversal.
How much of this do you think is hot air by Duterte? He is a little bit of a loose cannon. He likes to sort of keep people guessing as to what he is capable of doing, and he said a lot of offensive things since he became the president of the country. But realistically, Benoit, will he actually separate from the United States?
Yeah, well, that's another interesting to mention, because it's true that since he's taken office in June, Duterte has been known to use a lot of bluster, instill a lot of its discourse and rhetoric with bluster. So it remains to be seen really how this will translate in reality, because, as I said, I mean, the treaty that's been in place since 1951, it's not something that can be easily reversed. However, the fact that he's been talking about that increasingly in the last few months, about wanting to align with China and even with Russia recently, it's hard to imagine that there will not be some real consequences, even if he decides not to really rescind the agreement and treaty with the United States. There's a lot of things that can be done, including cutting some of the economic ties, for example, including canceling some of the military agreements or some of the military exercises that they usually do on a yearly basis. So there are some real consequences that may be shown, but it's just hard to, at this point, to see really how this will translate.
Benoit, we appreciate you coming on CTV. Great information there. Thank you.
Sure. It's a pleasure. Thank you.